Jim, I have a bone to pick with you. Our sales are in the graveyard. Could you please present your findings and make it quick?
You know, with the fiscal quarter creeping up, this plan should be boosting our sales. If I can only present it without disconnecting again. Oh, there it goes.
Please quick.
Jeepers creepers, this is the third time today.
Streamergency. The spooky, scary situation when one's video stream breaks down or cuts out unexpectedly. Fix streamergencies with Speedify. Don't be caught dead waiting for your streams and calls to reconnect. Trick or treat yourself to Speedify. Available now on iOS, Android, Mac, PC, and Linux. Boo.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Speedify Live, and I'm your host, Alex Gizis. Believe it or not, this is our 27th episode of Speedify Live. And boy, oh boy, do we have a good show today. Our special guest is Nick Garnett, reporter, broadcaster, videographer from the BBC. Hey, Nick.
Hey, welcome. How are you? It's great to be with you.
I'm good. So I guess before we start talking about stuff, just our setup tonight, we are actually using Restream here. And yeah, we're both using their web app, and then we're using them to stream it to all the other locations, right? So yeah, Restream Studio, sending it everywhere. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, now my LinkedIn. So today, LinkedIn told me that I was an influencer, and yeah, now you can follow me on LinkedIn. That's very exciting. You could be the first follower. So that's good. How are you, Nick?
I'm fine. I got back in. I've been rigging like crazy for about the last 10 minutes or so. I got in from another country just about 20 minutes ago. But it's not that exciting. Well, it is exciting. I was in Wales, which is just to the west of England and to the south of Scotland and to the east of Ireland and Northern Ireland. So Wales, I was over on a job there. And I was filming away at about 6 p.m. my time, which is about sort of like 1 o'clock your time. And I was looking at the clock thinking, time's going here, time's going and going and going and going. And so I've been racing back, got here about 15 minutes ago. So I put my lights up, I've sorted out my microphones, and I've got my glass of water, and my tea's in the other room, my dinner's in the other room. But I've got all my gadgets, and I can't wait to show you them all.
Good. Well, I'm glad you made it. I'm told that I'm 1/64th Welsh, which means nothing.
Oh, it does. Seriously, it does. I think that means that you can ride goats down the high street of Wrexham. I think that's
right.
Good.
So good. So for anyone who doesn't know, Speedify Live, this is our show where we try to talk about live streaming, right? And how to up your game. And sometimes that's about how to market your stream, and sometimes it's about gear. You know, we talk about software. Sometimes we talk about microphones. Sometimes we talk about just getting out there and making sure you start streaming, because obviously that's actually the hardest part of this. So, and we're with Speedify. I'm with Speedify, obviously. Nick's the BBC, which is our app that runs in the background and lets your computer or your phone combine all of its internet connections. So right now I'm on Wi-Fi and Ethernet, and I've tethered a cell phone here. Oh, yeah. Oh, there's our diagram. So I'm using all three at once. Something happens and my Wi-Fi stops working, I'll just use Ethernet. If If I kick out the Ethernet cable, which I've done many times before, we'll be on cellular and the stream just goes. So when you're doing something as important as live streaming, it really does wonders for your internet connectivity. All right. So should we talk about what you're using right now? Like,
Right.
What gear are you using right now?
Right now, to broadcast to you, I am using a single Ethernet connection. Because if I do that, what it does is it knocks off the Wi-Fi in my house and my children can't use it. So there's no way that they're going to interfere. So I've gone in with a hardwired Ethernet. And, I'll be honest, that's the gold standard. That's the thing that we want all the time. But we never, ever have it. And so probably for the last 25 years of my life, I have struggled and fought and battled to try and get connectivity in one sense or another. Now, we've only been using IP technology really probably over the last 10 years in broadcasting. It's really only in the last 10 years that Wi-Fi has been good enough, that cell networks have been good enough, that even Ethernet and broadband speeds have been good enough for us to start looking at IP technology. And it's still really in its infancy. And I think what I want to take you right the way back to what it was like 20 years ago in the real dark ages. That's a long time ago. You weren't even born then. So what I used to have was a radio car, which would broadcast over radio waves. It would broadcast radio waves, which would take my signal from wherever I was in the country, because you can't really drive those things abroad. And it would broadcast it to a local transmitter. The local transmitter would then link up to our main transmitters so that in the studios, and then would be rebroadcast out across the country, because my station that I work for is a national station across the whole of the UK. So that's where we used to be. Now, to do that, you had to have a radio car, and the radio cars used to have a pneumatic mast on it, which would sit inside the car and then be pumped up by a motor to probably about 30 feet, about 10 meters up into the air, where it would then radiate these radio waves to the local transmitter, unless it was windy, when you couldn't put it up, unless it was very rainy
power lines
when you couldn't put it, unless you were a long way from the local transmitter, in which case you couldn't broadcast. So all these things made it really, really difficult to actually get on the air. And then in about 2000, things started to take off. And we were looking at what the US Army was actually using and the British Army was using in the Middle East. And they were using satellite dishes. And I have one of them here. This is my trusted Hughes 9202 satellite dish. And these are used all over the world still. A lot of aid agencies use these to keep themselves with some internet connection. They cost an absolute fortune to run. They cost, I think it's around $5 a minute to broadcast on, which is an awful lot of money. Especially if you're doing like an 3-hour-long program. So these are absolutely brilliant. And we used to plug one of those into this piece of kit that looks as if it was made 100 years ago. But it's fantastic. And this is called an ISDN codec. Codec is code and decode. So what this does is it takes my microphone into there, and then it turns it into a digital signal, squirts it down the satellite. At the other end, it's decoded using the same sort of technology, and it becomes my voice again, or something close to my voice. And these things are absolutely
ISDN,
great.
as in the 1990s.
Yeah,
I
mean,
digital
standard. We still use these. These are still being used today. But the problem is that ISDN technology is really rather old-fashioned. It uses a 64 kilobit stream. So. Right. Frankly, we can do better than that now. And that's what I mean about once we started to get faster internet connectivity and a quality of service that meant that you had a good chance of that signal staying fairly steady. that was when things really started to take off. And we started working with a company that's based in Holland and called Technica del Arte. And they make an app, which was just mind-blowing for us, called Luci Live. And I'll show you the interface when it just decides to launch on itself. It's just hanging on me at the moment because I'm not connected to the internet because I've managed to kill off my Wi-Fi in my house. Anyway, let me tell you about this. So this works on a phone, and there we go. And that's sort of the interface. It's a very, very straightforward type of interface, very small. It's just got a couple of buttons on it, and it doesn't actually need half those buttons. It only needs 2 buttons, which is the microphone live and the little aerial, which means broadcast. And then you got, that's about it. So it's really, really good because guess what? It needs to be really simple because reporters are stupid. So that's the app that we started using.
Let me suggest that perhaps reporters have a lot going on in the field.
I prefer the idea that we're stupid, really. No, you're absolutely right. What you need is simple. You need something. You need any system that you're working with needs to be really, really simple. So this thing is actually a bit complicated because it's got numbers that go up to 9, and reporters can't count that high. So it's better that we if they only had 1 to 3, that'd be good, and we could cope with that. But that one has 1 to 9, so this is simpler. It just has on/off. So we went from the satellites to using IP technology and audio over IP, which in effect became Skype, and it became FaceTime audio, and it became all those audio apps. But it's better quality. It's really good, and we can tune it as well. So you can have really, really fat broadband, and you can put a really good quality stereo signal down these things. Now, having a wonderful quality signal is not what I need in my life, because what I do is I try to broadcast on this wherever I am in the world. That could be in a riot, it could be in a war zone, it could be while a terrorist attack's going on, it could be at a football match, it could be anywhere at all. You need to broadcast. And that's where it gets really problematic, because as soon as cell networks start to get congested, then the available bandwidth to each and every user starts to go down and down and down. It gets smaller and smaller. And therefore, you start to get crunched. And therefore, there are all sorts of problems. You just literally fall off the air. And that has happened in so many times. So probably about 8 years ago, the company that started doing this worked on a type of software, the type of software that you use. And then that you created, and it's bonding technology. I get my cell signal, and I can get a Wi-Fi signal, or another cell signal, or an Ethernet signal, and you can bond the two together. And then if one of them goes down, then you've still got the other one running. And really, that was the turning point. Suddenly, we had quality of service, and pretty much you can be sure that in 90% of the country, for probably 90% of the time, you can get a broadcast quality signal. And that liberation that does is amazing, because we've gone down from me using a huge pickup truck with a pneumatic mast on the top of it to a phone, and that's staggering. And there is another reason. I'm going to digress here. There's another reason why those pneumatic masts are not a good idea, because when you've got a pneumatic mast on the vehicle, it goes to probably about 2 meters tall all the time. Even if you compress it down to its very lowest, it's still like a tripod. It's about 2 meters tall. And so once I had to borrow a radio car from another radio station, because my radio car that I was using was in the garage. So I borrowed one from a radio station I used to work from, and drove off to go and cover a story. And I drove into the car park at about 30 miles an hour because I was in a rush to get into the car park and set the mast up. And as I drove in, 2 things went through my mind. The first thing that went through my mind was, there's a height restrictor on the top of this car park. And the second thing was, and that's actually slightly lower than the mast that's on the car. And so the mast on the car smacked straight into the height restrictor in the car park. And Newton's laws and all that sort of thing. When an action goes that way, the bottom of the mast that was inside the vehicle went that way, forwards, and smashed the whole of the interior of the car. It looked like a Cadbury's flake at the end of it, the top of the car. It was waving all over the place. The whole car was written off. I was in so much trouble for it. And probably that was the moment that I thought, I want to get to a point where I can use a mobile phone, because I'm much, much less likely to break one of those. So that's where we are. That's where we're at now. And everything has been up to that point. And that's fantastic. We tend to use the internal microphone on the phones. And that can be Android. There are Android versions of things, or there's iOS versions of the same software. It doesn't really matter. And we use those pretty well, pretty much all of the time. But then there is a problem, because it's a phone. At the end of the day, it's a phone, and it's not a piece of professional broadcasting equipment. And no matter how much you want it to be that, it isn't. And so what we decided to do was to start looking at other things that were on the market.
So what are the weaknesses? Like, why is it?
Well, first of all, the physical weakness is that blasted socket on the bottom. The number of times that I've seen reporters have come to me and go, my phone's not working, and they've got a right-angled lightning socket on the bottom where they've bent it, or they've pulled it out and the half the lightning cable is still inside the phone. Then you get all sorts of other things, like the fact that, frankly, phones are what people ring you on. So you can be, if you don't press the right buttons, in effect, the focus settings, the do not disturb, if you don't turn those on, someone dials you in the middle of your broadcast, which tends to pop you off the air, which isn't great as well. And so something else had to be there, really. And what we were really thinking of is what happens if there was, for instance, a worldwide pandemic and we couldn't go into our radio studios to broadcast from. And yeah. And look what happened. It happened. Now, for about a year before that, there'd been a company called IPDTL, which used to be, which was set up by a colleague of mine. And he created a piece of software using, in effect, what we're using now in terms of browser-based hard software. And what IPDTL did was it uses Chrome's WebRTC. Is it an interface? It's not an interface. I don't know what it is. Code.
An API.
It's an API. Yeah. And so they set up and they started using that. And basically what that did was it punched through as much as you possibly could, a direct link. I mean, it's not a direct link, it's the internet. So it's going via Chile and it's going via Australia, but as much of a connection as you could between 2 points. And it created that link. And so what we wanted to do then was, frankly, not spend an awful lot of money on big computers and expensive computers. And we came up with this. This is here's the first version of it, a Raspberry Pi, which costs about $50. The case costs about $10. The screen costs about $100. And it has a touch screen on it, and we can link up to our studios using these, and it's amazing. We can link up in whatever quality we want. If we want to be broadcasting in a beautiful stereo signal for the classical music station, it's just fantastic, and we can use that. Then, of course, I started to think, okay, I want to go out on the road with this thing. I want to take it out, and that's not very hard wearing. I've cracked a few of those cases. And so what we did was we put it in a Pelly case. So this is a Pi in a Pelly. And there was a really good designer, I think he's based in New York, and he came up with this idea. He got the case, he got the Raspberry Pi, and he worked out how and where to drill these holes. And he released these plans on the internet. They're free of charge. But you can put on your Raspberry Pi onto the back of the computer, onto the back of an acrylic panel, and that can just sit inside. Now, the beauty of this is they don't take XLR microphones, old-fashioned analog microphones. They take USB microphones. and you can plug one of those in. You can get, and this is where it all comes back to the bonding technology. You can start plugging things into the other USB sockets. So when I'm using this out on the road, I will have 2 dongles. You call them dongles?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also an
A
Ethernet.
terrible word, but it's the
It
word
is.
we
It is.
use.
It's a bad word, isn't it? They didn't think it through when they thought that one. And also an Ethernet socket. So I can use that with an Ethernet MiFi, an Ethernet portable internet connection. And lo and behold, you've got one microphone in there. You've got 2 dongles in there. You've got an Ethernet there. And you've got Wi-Fi running on the thing as well. If only we had some software that we could bond all those signals together and broadcast over. Hey, guess what we did? We started using yours. Others, I don't think are available, but we haven't used others. But what we did was we used the Speedify software at a command line level. So it's not running a whole UI which is starting to drain resources. It's really very, very base level. And the really clever people at the BBC got it all working. And we're now presenting whole programs every single day of the year have been presented using this technology. All our weather reports from our weather presenter are done on them. You know, we're using these all the time. And the reason that you might think, okay, you've got an Ethernet socket there, you're doing these things, these broadcasts from home, and you've got a hardwired Ethernet in there. So what's the problem? Well, I didn't know this, but there are various ISPs who don't like us using what's called SIP technology over their lines. And SIP is it's part of the WebRTC thing. It's an API. It's a language that they will use.
Yeah. So by the way, so Restream Studio and StreamYards and Google Meet are all built on WebRTC.
Yeah.
So like we're using WebRTC right now to do this broadcast, right?
I always tell the story about what WebRTC was really designed for, or was imagined to be for, right at the beginning. And really, it was supposed to be for customer services on Amazon or something similar. It was supposed to be a way that if you were browsing on the internet, you could see a little button. I will mention that there are other plans for this. Don't worry. I've just had a message from somebody in Honolulu. Hi. So I was saying that, yes, WebRTC was a way of communicating for customer services. And the idea is that you would be on your browser, you'd have a question about a product, you'd click on it, and a voice would appear as if out of nowhere in broadcast quality and say, hi, how can I help you? Instead of it being a terrible phone line quality or anything like that. But then the broadcasters and the clever ones saw the potential in this, and they've harnessed it for itself. So it's built into the Chrome browser, and yet is used in so many ways. And in many ways, we haven't even started to touch the surface with this. And this is the future in terms of technology. It's amazing. I'm desperate for it to get to a point where, I mean, you and I are talking in almost real time between each other.
Yeah.
But there have got to be better solutions than Zoom for using all types of conferencing. And WebRTC really, it's just staggering. Now, somebody has said as well, I've just got a message here that I do want to answer. Someone mentioned that there are other plans out there. Oh, is that what you want? I'm not sure. You mentioned that the plans are out there. Oh, I see. He wants the plans for the for that box.
For the box, yeah.
Right. I'll put a tweet out later, and I'll put it through Speedify's account so that you can find it. I'll send you a link to it. It's really good. There are other technologies, because what we've talked about so far is audio. And of course, the BBC is an awful lot more than just audio. It's all video. And we're now using, instead of satellite transmitters, again for video, we're using video over IP as well. And so we are using things like LiveView, WMT, and Degero. And I think it was about 2009 that I did the first broadcast, at least in the BBC and across the BBC, using an iPhone and Degero software, which is one of the the live over IP camera technologies. I didn't know I was going to be doing it on that day. I thought I was just going to be out there to do some radio. And then I was in a flood, and I was on one side of the flood, and my camera crew and the satellite was on the other side, and we couldn't get together. And so I had to do something to get on air. And so I ran off to a local second-hand store, and I found a tripod, and then I found some gaffer tape, some sticky tape, and I put it on, and it started to rain, and I had nothing to control the rain over the iPhone. And in these day and age, and that day and age, iPhones weren't waterproof at all. So I was in real trouble here. And so I got a beer mat, a beer tray to hold beer, pints of beer, and held that over the top of the phone. It looked ludicrous, but that was the first broadcast pictures that we had using a phone over IP. And that was I think that was about 2007, 2009 that we did that.
Okay. So Call Me V is asking a question, which is, what's powering it? So you have the plate that goes in the Pelican.
So
is there a battery in there somewhere?
Yeah, you can use all sorts of things. One of the lovely things about technology these days is so much of it runs on 5 volts. And so what you can do is you can get this running on a power pack. I use a Huawei MiFi portable Wi-Fi unit, which has an Ethernet socket. It also has a battery in it, so you can actually charge and run this from the MiFi unit, which then plugs in and gives it internet access, which is, I think, pretty symbiotic. It's impressive. So yeah, so 5 volts. That's the great thing about it, and they're not heavy draw. They really, it's less than 1 amp, much less than 1 amp, I think, and it's just fantastic. And it's the only thing I've ever used a Raspberry Pi for. I'm sure there are loads of things to use it for, but that's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, I'm actually using this one to give me a very slow Wi-Fi hotspot.
Yeah.
Normally people use Speedify to speed things up, but if you play with settings long enough, there are rate limits. Yeah. So I've set this up as my Wi-Fi that never lets me go faster than 2 megabits. So if I want to try bad internet,
so I wanted. So when I was talking before about why we use Speedify in the Raspberry Pis and why we need bonding technology in those. It's not because the internet falls down, but what it does is it's there for when there's a glitch. It's there for when there's a little bit of a cutoff, and you don't want that, especially in radio, or even more especially on TV. You don't want those freezes, those moments where we've all heard it, where the quality of the line suddenly drops down like crazy as the software just sends it over to phone quality, and we don't want that to happen. We want everything to be seamless, so we have multiple sources going into them, so that most of the time I don't think they're even needed, but on those occasions when they just kick in automatically. And the idea is that you can't tell the difference, and I don't know whether they work because I've never told the difference. So they must be working.
Yeah, it's actually a real problem for us, right? In our user interface design, right? Because everyone thinks if Speedify works perfectly, it should never bother you. But then people have no idea if it actually helped, right? So I've seriously had conversations with people who said they got Speedify, used it for a week, decided it did nothing, uninstalled it, and then had this terrible week where their internet didn't work before it finally clued in, like, oh, no, wait, I got addicted to Speedify and I didn't even know. And they put it back and we're happy again.
Yeah.
So we've made up a word, streamergency, for those situations where the internet glitches and everything goes wrong in the middle of your stream. So I was sort of wondering, do you have any good examples of getting burned?
Streamergency. The stressful situation when one's live stream breaks down or cuts out unexpectedly.
Sorry about that.
It's very good. Right, the two that spring to mind are one that happened a couple of weeks ago to a colleague and friend of mine called Dan Johnson, who works at the BBC. And he was broadcasting, I think, in Delhi. And he was chatting away, and then the line from his return feed froze. And the biggest danger with things like that is that you think that it's your line that's frozen or you've dropped off the air. So he just went, "Oh, great," and stormed off the set in the middle of a question. And of course, he hadn't frozen at all. He'd gone straight on through. So that was. I think that's on the internet on his internet feed. You'd be able to see that.
Speaking of Delhi, happy Diwali, everyone.
Exactly.
I didn't say that for
unless you're in Nepal, in which case it's tomorrow.
There.
It's tomorrow in Nepal.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
Nonetheless, early happy Diwali.
Yeah. And then the other one was my darling wife. Now, my wife is also a TV reporter, and she was sent out to go and stand on the coastline. This is what all reporters get to do: to stand in the way of the waves to talk about the fact that the waves are really big and are going to get you soaked. Anyway, so there she was getting soaked. And what normally happens with a TV live is that we'll set everything up. And this was actually, it wasn't a stream emergency. This was a satellite emergency. So there she was with a satellite dish on ready and set up, her camera crew filming her, everything ready. And then the inevitable happens, which is the studio says, "Yep, we're coming to you in 15 minutes time." Oh, no. So you're standing there getting freezing wet and cold, and the rain's hitting you. The waves are hitting you. It's just absolutely terrible. And then they come to you and say, "Coming to you in 20 seconds. So she got ready. They crossed to her, and that's the point that the satellite blew slightly off course, lost the satellite connection, and she froze absolutely stone cold. And they never even crossed to her. And in the end, what always happens is they look at the line and go, "We're not going to risk that." And they went on to the next story. So she'd been stuck there for a long, long time, absolutely drenched to the skin, and didn't even get on air. I was at home in the warmth, so I don't mind.
Yeah. So by the way, we are live here. So anyone, you can ask questions, and been answering some of them, although we've been talking so fast today, we've clearly been missing a bunch. Here we go. Call me V again. Sounds like stream emergency to him. So sea emergency. Oh, he's got the pun going.
See what you did there.
This is the last time we call on Call Me V. So just ask questions and we will answer them. We are here for you. So I think you sent some pictures, did you?
I did. Let's have a look at some pics. I'll tell you a little bit about where they were.
The magic people.
Here we go. Right. So this is the year 2000. This is above a hotel bar, above a bar in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And it's during Euro 2000, which is the soccer tournament for the whole of Europe. We should just call it the world. And that is the amount of equipment we used to have to carry to get 2 or 3 people on the air. And it weighed an absolute ton. And the guy who sets all that up has just retired from the BBC in the last week. And I was doing his leaving tape. And people were, to commemorate his time in the BBC. And people were sending me all their memories and their stories about him. And all the stories were exactly the same, which was Gary. That's his name. Gary, I always used to make sure I was sitting nowhere near you on the plane, so that when the carousel came round with 100 Pelly cases, I never had to carry them. And this story was told by every single person because nobody wanted to be the person that carried his cases. I mean, who knows how much he paid in excess baggage? It was just gigantic. And what the idea behind this was we were over in Eindhoven. Now we're a UK radio station. Of course, you can't pick up the radio station over in the Netherlands, which was where England was playing. And this was before everybody had internet access. But people still needed to find out what was happening in football matches and what was happening in hotels and where they needed to go at what time. And so what we did was we took over the bandwidth and the radio waves of a Dutch radio station, which we're told is the only time that has ever happened in peacetime. And we took them over, we broadcast on their frequencies. using all this technology and a mast that you can't see that is hanging out of the roof. That's in the loft of the little pub. It's hanging out of the loft, strapped on with gaffer tape. And that was how we broadcast there. We've moved on a little bit since then.
Nice. Yeah, look at all the cable patches. And
So this is my darling wife. And if you look at what she's using there, she's using a phone, which I think is an iPhone 6S. And that's really right at the beginning. That's probably about 2014, maybe 2013. So quite a long time ago. And that's how long we've been using it. You know, the beauty of it is that you can set up and just do it on your own. The danger, of course, is that someone comes along and runs off with your iPhone and your tripod and all your cables. So that's, you know, there is a very good reason why we don't do this for every single job. The piece that I was just working on this evening was doing some filming of members of the public on my own, and it is a really scary thing. You're leaving your kit and your camera and your tripods and everything just out of sight, and it's not the easiest thing. But you know, we've got severe budget restrictions. We can't go wasting money when on little things that I was doing. So that's why we had to do it that way. But it just shows that we've been doing this for quite a long time, over 10 years. Well, nearly 10 years.
Nice. All right.
Right, this is Paris in 2015. And literally, I ran around Paris for about 5 days just using my phone and broadcasting on it. We'll see another picture a little bit later, which shows something else, another side of Paris. But this was during the terrorist attacks in January of 2015. And you could pop up, you'd go down into the metro, the underground, come up in another part of the city, no rigging time at all, which is the amazing thing. No getting satellites out, no pointing them at the skies, trying to find out where the satellite is, and then being able to broadcast. And to be able to do it just on the hoof. And the only restriction we ever had was that my battery used to run flat. But they've got a bit better since then. The message here from Scott Lane saying, I'm still amazed by the fact that the $30,000 ENG camera I used early in my career is so inferior in quality to what I can get out of a Samsung phone. In some ways, but in other ways, it isn't. Okay, the cinematic type cameras that we're getting now are a step up, a big step up, and the biggest step up for quite a few years in phone technology in terms of cameras. But, you know, there's still something about those cameras. There's still something about the weight of them. There's still something about the power of them. You know, that they're really, really important.
And the zoom.
Yeah.
I mean,
so this picture is a staggering one. This is in Nice in the south of France. And there was a terrorist attack there, and I got sent over to go and cover it. This is just a ghastly story. It's just appalling. What happened was that a lorry drove down the seafront, just running into people and killing them. And each of you can see in that picture there, you can see the flowers and the stones left. And that's where there was a victim of the killing. And the locals decided that they didn't want to clear everything away and there not to be a sign of what had happened. And they wanted these memorials all along the front. And they lasted there. I was there for a week, I think. And they lasted there all the way through. And see them. Am I back? I think I went for a second.
You are back. Yeah, just for a second.
That's my daughter on trying to get the Wi-Fi working.
All right, man, that's tragic.
This again, this is the old technologies. You still see this occasionally, but these are the satellite trucks in Paris. My satellite truck is the one at the back there.
Uh-oh.
Am I back? Am I back?
You're back.
I'm back. I don't understand why this is happening, but I'm going to shoot the code. Yeah. So these are the lines of trucks that we used to have on any big story. You'd see all these lines, and now, in many ways, they've all gone. They've either gone through bonding technology, bonding hardware technology solutions, which camera crews can strap onto the back of their cameras. But, you know, there's tech in the city saying, I remember those parades of vans. I remember once I was in Boston for a trial of a babysitter, a babysitter from the UK who was standing trial for murder. And I arrived at this long line of satellite trucks, and the engineer on one of the trucks, I just got off the plane. I was covered in sweat. I was carrying my bags. It was just, it was terrible. I looked a real mess, and I had about 36 hours of stubble. And this guy came over and thrust this microphone in front of me and said, "You're going live in a second." And he buzzed through and he said, "Hey, London, your talent's here." Now, that's a phrase that you use in the States all the time. Your talent is here. It's not a phrase that we use in the UK. And I thought that he was, frankly, taking the piss out of me. And so was about to land in one until he explained what it all meant. But those, you don't see those lines anymore. It's really strange. I don't know what's happened to them all. Sometimes those vehicles end up on eBay. I would not buy one. Don't buy one. Don't be trying.
So those are all geosynchronous, right? So they'd have to park the van, make sure it's facing south.
Yeah.
Right.
For instance,
pointed at the satellite.
So the satellite from my house is straight over number 24's chimney. And I know that it's always over. It's a geolocated satellite. I always point it over number 24's chimney, and I know that I'm going to get on. This picture, if we go back to that one, there we go. Right, this is another bonding technology piece of hardware. This is called a quantum light, that little box on top of that bin. It needs to be placed somewhere where it's not going to be moved around too much, so that, well, you can move it around. It's just that I'm slightly superstitious, and I always try and put it somewhere, leave it, and carry on working. Now, this got me on air using the bonding technology, and this is why bonding technology is so important. That got me on air when there were 70,000 Liverpool football fans at the European Champions League final all around me, and they were all on their phones. But because I was bonding the signals together, it was able to get through and broadcast. So this thing uses SIMs inside the device, and everything was going well there. The only problem was that is a dog poo bin. And I did not know that at the time that I put it on. God, did I know it by the end of it. It stank.
So is it only audio? It's straight audio in, or is it like
that's straight audio.
And IP in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, they have video the same size now for video, which is just, it's amazing technology. When you think what we used to use, as we say, we used to use those huge big trucks, and now we've got it down to that. As long as there are cell networks around.
Right.
There is my wife. That is the moment
she is again.
She was about to freeze in so many ways. I don't know who it was. Maybe the person who took that photograph should have been holding onto the satellite, and then it wouldn't have moved. Don't know.
That's so funny.
And here we are. There's your software running on. That was an early version of the Raspberry Pi in a Peli case, and that was our way of doing it, because we couldn't at that stage build the command line interface into the Peli, into the Raspberry Pi, and so we were using a phone to act as the bonder to get the signals out. So there you go. That's you in operation there.
Nice.
There's one of the Raspberry Pis now, and that's that little Huawei MiFi at the back there with the Ethernet cable, which is also, I think, it is. I think that's powering it as well. So that's providing the battery power for the Raspberry Pi and the Ethernet connection. So it's sucking the power through it, and it's going. It's just amazing stuff. And then you've got a couple of dongles in there as well, and it's all running on a single Rode USB microphone.
Nice. All right.
And there's my baby satellite, my darling love of my life. And that's in Jordan. I was sent over at the beginning of the Syrian war. And the great thing about it is that it will work anywhere in the world. It's fantastic. And I had my scripts on that day, all on an iPad. And I had lots and lots of audio that I was going to read into. So what I mean by that is that I send the bits of audio to the studio, and there's somebody ready to play my bit of audio by pressing play on the machine. when I say the words, David said this to me. And so I knew that the first one was David said this to me, but I think it was 7 bits of audio. And so I needed it all written down. So I had all my scripts on my iPad, and I dialed up the studio, got ready to go live. And it was about 43, 45 degrees, and the iPad overheated. And so if you've ever had an iPad overheat, it just comes up with this message that's something like, uh-oh, I've got to cool down. And I'd lost every single thing that I had. I had nothing to say. It was just like, I had to make it up. And luckily, the guys that run the studios at the BBC are brilliant. And so they can tell from the intonation of your voice when you're about to get ready to say something. And they did that for every single one. They were brilliant, and they looked after me all the way through. But that's I love that satellite dish. It's great.
So you said it works anywhere in the world.
Yeah, that's in.
Does it come with a book or something telling you which satellite to use?
No, this is the amazing thing.
The geosynchronous, sir.
It's always the same satellite. It's at I think mine is at 185 degrees, Atlantic East. It's called, and you go onto a different one if you're in a different part of the world. So in some countries, when you're near the equator, you're literally pointing it straight up into the sky, which is just a weird thing.
Yeah.
But this is the same kit being used on some bins in the middle of Paris after one of the terrorist attacks, and we used that because there were so many people on their cell phones that we needed to have a solid link that went out. The only downside of that was that yet again I'd managed to pick a toilet as something to put the satellite dish on. So after about 45 minutes, it was really warm and it was really smelly. It was not a nice place to be. We were there for quite a few hours.
A common theme in your story.
Yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know why.
Oh man. So when did you start in all this? Like when did you become a journalist?
I became a journalist.
When did you get into the tech?
1986 was when I started, and I started in local radio, which is small city-based radio stations, and we used to use a tape recorder, a reel-to-reel tape recorder in those days, because it was before cassettes were good enough to actually use for broadcasting, and it was before anything. It was we were the only thing we had were these reel-to-reel tape recorders, and they weighed the same as a newborn baby, and you had it on your shoulder for 4 or 5 hours a day walking around. It was absolute agony. The batteries only lasted about 25 minutes. The reels of tape only lasted about 15 minutes, and they were useless. They were terrible, and you had to go back to the studios to take the 2 reels of tape off, put them onto a big machine so you could edit them, and you edited them by cutting them with a razor blade. You'd mark it with some yellow pencil, and then you would cut it with a razor.
Uh-oh. Wait, so the interesting thing is he's still there.
There I am again.
So I want to point out that you actually didn't disconnect there. Just the little switch on you in Restream Studio flipped off. I saw you still going the whole time. Yeah. I think this is a software bug that has nothing to do with internet connectivity or Speedify.
So anyway, I don't know where I got to, but basically I was saying that these reel-to-reel machines were really hard to edit with. And then a guy who was at a radio station in the UK came up with a magic thing, which was basically the start of everything that we do now in terms of portable broadcasting. And what he did, this is the amazing thing, he glued, using super glue, an editing block onto the top of the tape recorder. And then he could, while he was sitting in a taxi cab, driving back towards the studio, he could edit the tape as he was going. So when he got back to the base, he was ready to go and ready to put the piece on air. And that was the start of mobile broadcasting.
So an interesting thing here, right, is, cut and paste, which we think of, Control C, Control X, whatever. Like it actually was a thing. Like people cut and pasted. That's how you edited back
and
then.
How I've got fingers left, I don't know, because I was useless and we were cutting, and you're using razor blades. You're using absolute, the razor blades that you get in, say, Turkish barbers, where they're doing your neckline. It was one of those, and God, I used to cut my fingernails off every day. It was terrible.
Oof.
So thank God for Sony mini disc, for Philips DCC. Thank God for all of that, because it's amazing. So that's what
Marston's asking, what app are you using on the Raspberry Pi?
Well, we built it ourselves. It's all freeware.
Okay.
It's all freeware, and it's WebRTC. So what we've tried to do is cut it back so that there's no way that, frankly, stupid reporters can press the wrong button, because they do. If you give a reporter a button to press, they will press it. So the trick is never, ever, ever give a reporter a button that they can press. So that's why Luci Live, the app on the iPhone, is really good. And that's why our design that we've done by stripping everything off and making it into a very, very simple, almost simplistic interface really works well, because reporters are simplistic.
Yes, so Scott Lane is saying that Speedify and the RPI, he's built a similar Go box.
Excellent. Great.
Yeah.
I mean, what I really want is to get to a point where, with a Raspberry Pi, and I've looked at the things that you've.
He's still on.
Still there.
Yeah, you were still connected the whole time.
If I move my hand to the left, I think I go off. So I'll try not to. It's a bit like the poo bin, and I just need to have it high. Yeah. I did go black for a second when it happened. That's interesting. What was I saying? I was talking about something and I can't remember what.
Something very important.
It probably was. If anyone can help me
cutting and pasting.
Go on, cutting and pasting. Go on, Raspberry Pi. Yeah, your backpack, right? You did this brilliant. I think it was a video, or it was just a talk through on the web, of trying to build a way of having a backpack with a Raspberry Pi in, with Speedify running, that you could then use and broadcast and get broadcast quality pictures out of. And I think you got to 720p in terms of quality before it kicks out.
Yeah, so the Raspberry Pi, actually doing video on it, not so hot. Streaming video through it, if something else. Yeah, so these days when I've gone streaming, now I use the iPhone to a hotspot on the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah,
and then I can hang multiple internet connections off this, but it's just moving the megabits of video data. Yeah,
so,
we never managed to get any. There's supposed to be some hardware support for video in there, and it seems like apparently nobody's gotten it to actually work.
So maybe the answer is that we wait for the developments in phone technology, and maybe that takes that place. And
it might be the Raspberry Pi 5.
Well, Raspberry Pi 5
in another year. The other problem to Raspberry Pi, which I guess doesn't affect you doing audio, but it's got an ARM processor on there, but it's missing the ARM commands for encryption. I guess they saved a little bit of money, right? The vision of the Raspberry Pi is the best computer they can build for 30 pounds, and so they have to count every penny. And apparently there's an extra fee for the encryption, and they didn't pay it. So the encryption all has to be done in software, which is why bothers me. We can only get about 400 megabits through a Raspberry Pi, and it's very much because we're encrypting in software, not using the hardware acceleration that if you buy a $30 phone at Walmart, it comes with hardware.
Yeah.
With hardware encryption these days. And the Raspberry Pi is about the last device you can buy that is still sold that doesn't have any encryption in it.
If we could
odd thing.
If we could stop these things accepting phone calls, I think they'd really come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard people say that you should buy iPad minis.
We've done that in the past.
Because they're big cell phones that don't get calls.
Yeah.
Who wants calls, right? There's no value to them.
For us, I mean, the audio side is fine. We're all very sad about the loss of the 3.5 millimeter headphone socket still. I'm very sad for that sometimes. But there are ways around it. And things are improving there. But, in terms of cameras, iPad mini is still not brilliant. Not as good as the iPhones or the new Samsungs. And so that's the problem. But, it'll come. It'll come.
Yeah, I guess they just launched a new one where they finally updated it to be about at the same level as the phones again.
Yeah.
It had fallen way behind.
Yes. Yeah.
So what do you do outside of work? Do you have any hobbies? or is
Hobby.
this it?
Well, no, I mean, it pretty much is. This is the hobby, really.
I have that sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of dog walking, and there's a lot of looking after kids and things like that, really. But no, I mean, in terms of it's gadgets, really, and it's trying to get things done, and that really probably annoys my wife like crazy when I'm stuck upstairs just with a soldering iron trying to get things working. But I mean, one of the things, we've been talking a lot about Raspberry Pis, and I'd love people to play more with them, because the feeling of success that you get when you build it, and literally all you're doing is you're putting a few jumper cables on and sticking it together, screwing it together. And it's fantastic. It's just brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, it really
and
is.
I've had people who've never touched a computer insides, and they've built themselves a Raspberry Pi that's working. And we put out the instructions how to build these boxes, these ones, on our own internet system. And people are still doing it. People are building it themselves, downloading the software onto it, sticking the software on the side, and they're up and running. And I just think that's fantastic. When you think back to just 5 years ago, we were building power PCs that were just absolutely massive, or Macs that you couldn't actually adapt or change or do anything to. And this is just a completely brilliant technology. As you say, Raspberry 5, that's what we want now.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're small and cheap enough. You can just do little things,
Yep.
stick one on the back of a screen and, have it just showing something, or controlling your Christmas tree, or
Mine controls my front doorbell. I've got another
Nice.
one. Yeah.
I had one controlling my stereo for a while, and then I just bought a bunch of Alexas and got rid of it. But
there you go.
So now Jeff Bezos hears everything I say.
There is that downside to it, yeah. I want to ask you one thing, which is that there are different versions of Speedify in terms of redundancy mode and streaming mode. How do they work? And will people who stream see a real advantage by moving on to the different types of settings?
Yes, at this point, so we've got there's a couple modes, right, under the covers, right? Sometimes it's just trying to use the best internet connection to keep you online, because it sees the internet connection you have. Like, if it sees your Wi-Fi is good enough, it'll just use that and be watching for problems in order to switch over to another internet connection, especially when other internet connections are expensive, right? So there's a priority in Speedify. You can set them to primary, which means it's cheap, use it all the time, and secondary, which means it's a little bit more expensive, So normally the cellular is set to secondary, and the Wi-Fi is primary. But if we decide you really want to go fast, we'll start using all the internet connections, and every packet will decide which is the best internet connection for this. So if your Wi-Fi is twice as fast as your cellular, we'll put 2/3 of your packets on the Wi-Fi and 1/3 on the cellular, and you have to do smart stuff like that. So you really get the speed of both of them added up.
And how does that not cause a problem for latency, but also for jitter between, especially, I mean, here I am talking in audio terms, how does it not cause jitter in a speech?
A lot of smart things. So we're timing every packet, and we're taking into account the latency. And so a lot of times what happens is we start off sending the packets on the connection with the lowest latency. But as you give it more packets, the latency starts going up. So now the other one's worth using, right? So you start giving it some. And so we sort of keep balanced. There's a little bit of smart code on the server, which is watching to see if the packets are getting out of order, and it'll rearrange them a little bit. They're like computer science hard problems. It turns out it's a bad idea to have the server hold up and get everything in perfect order. So we don't do that. We do a little bit of work, with some out of order packets we fix. And it turns out in most cases, that's enough, because you don't want everything held up forever.
I first came across you and the work that you're doing, and I think it was 2016. Would it have been 2016,
right.
2015, 2016? And I was working in Hamburg, in Germany, and with terrible connectivity. And the only way that I could actually broadcast was to go and stand outside the Apple store down by the waterfront in Hamburg, because it had a really good
The
free
best
Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Yep.
And you could always see people hanging around outside closed Apple stores. So that was where I was. But frankly, the story that I was covering was not outside the Apple store down by the waterfront in Hamburg. It was elsewhere. And so I needed a way that we could actually broadcast. And that's when somebody in my office phoned me up and said, "Hey, download this. This could be good." And that was how I started using it.
So the third mode is redundant mode. And this is where we send the packets on every internet connection you have, and we only deliver whichever copy gets through first. So if you're doing audio on very unreliable internet connections, this makes sense, right? If you're browsing the web and stuff, this is just a very expensive way to do things. But for people who are doing audio and need it to get through, we'll send it on your Wi-Fi, we'll send it on your cellular, and at the other end, we make sure that only one copy is given through at the end. Now, the cool thing that we've added is streaming mode in Speedify, where Speedify is working this out, and you don't have to pick between redundant and speed. And there's one more level of smarts here, which is that it's watching for things that appear to be important. It's looking for VoIP. It's looking for things that look like streaming video. And when it spots them, it treats them as more important. So like if it sees loss, it'll make those important calls redundant, but it will never make Windows Update redundant, right? That can live on just one internet connection. And it also starts kicking the quality service. If it sees we're doing a live stream here and it sees Windows Update it's running and the internet's not fast enough, it'll make sure that this live stream gets through. Let me pull up Speedify. Here, let me share this for a second, because it's actually showing a bunch of stuff about this. Has that shown up? Oh, there we go. Oh, while talking, I nervously unplugged my cell phone. That's a dangerous thing to do during a live stream. So you see my two internet connections, Ethernet and the Wi-Fi, and in a second, now it recognizes phone as cellular. And scrolling down here are the streams. So it has recognized Restream as very important. And it's showing up twice, which is perfectly normal. Probably one stream is me and one stream is you, or something like that. Yeah. And so you can see the two streams going on, and it says that it's actually saved both of them from latency and packet loss, and one failover, which is probably the moment that I unconsciously unplugged my iPhone. Well, that's a habit to break.
So the only thing I'd say, looking at the UI at the moment, is that you haven't learnt about reporters. You've left that button that you can turn it off. You've got to get rid of that button there that you can take it out, that you can turn it off, and just make sure reporters never see that. So you could have a reporter version, which is just really, really, it just doesn't exist. It's just there, running.
Yeah, we talk about doing a much simpler interface. Usually we talk about just a start-stop button, leaving nothing but that switch and taking everything else away. But we've experimented, and people can't tell if it actually does anything for them. Yeah. So maybe it's the other way around.
You need the flashing
light. Yeah. So, all right. Some more comments about the iPad Mini. Faster one, yeah. So USB, we put up a video about this. We plugged in Lightning to the camera kit to a USB hub.
Yeah.
And then we started plugging in Ethernet cards.
Yeah.
And we had 30 connections on the iPad. So we sent an email with a link to it to the one of the networking engineers at Apple, and he was very, very happy. He said that actually he wrote the code to make sure that worked. So that was just really cool.
I mean, it's amazing that Apple didn't take the Ethernet connectivity out. They did for a while in one of the betas, I think, a couple of years ago, and it just disappeared after they'd put it in and it had been working perfectly. They just took it away, and then they brought it back again. Thank goodness.
Probably a bug.
Yeah, because
Android has a terrible thing. When most Android devices, when they see that Ethernet is there, they just turn off their Wi-Fi.
Hmm.
And there's like nothing we could do. We actually found it in the source code of Android, right? If Ethernet works, turn off Wi-Fi. And there was no setting or anything. There was just somebody wrote that on purpose. It's what they meant to do. All right. Wow, we're more than an hour here. Any advice to people out there trying to get started?
Get started in this universe? Well, think about how you monetize it. That's the one thing I'd say. You can go into these things, and I say this for all young journalists now, is to just think about how you can monetize it. How can you make a living out of what you're doing? And it's normally by having a little USP, a unique selling point for yourself. Are you the greatest hockey player who can broadcast as well? Are you the greatest flapjack maker who can broadcast as well? And be something more than just a reporter. Everyone calls himself a reporter these days. Everyone calls himself a journalist. Be something more than that. And that's the way to be. And in terms of technology, just try and keep things simple. My biggest failing is that I have so much kit. I have so many boxes of wires that are just, redundant. I don't need them all. And the more and more I go on in life, the more I realize that really the only device I need is a phone. And each year they're getting better and better and better. And they haven't taken the place of my. This is my favorite camera. This is lovely. This is the one that I use when I'm putting live pictures for TV on, because we stream that to a MacBook, and then that goes over to the BBC servers. And that's just lovely. But we're getting so close. If Apple would actually give out their API for their camera for the cinematic mode a little bit more, and everyone could use it, then I think I'll probably sell that camera at some stage. That's the future. That's the future.
So, do you have the new one? Have you been playing cinematic mode?
Yeah, I have, and it's
how well does it actually work?
I've heard really well.
Different things.
In about. Actually, probably about now, there may well be a piece on the BBC TV News, which was filmed with it, which will be the first shots that will have been filmed on it. And they were in cinematic mode tonight. I mean, I needed to put a lot of light on the people who was filming, because it's not that great. It starts to hunt around a little bit in the dark, which you expect, and it can start to get a little bit noisy in terms of grain. But it's great. It's good fun. I'm not that keen on the where you if you turn and you look at someone else and it starts to focus on them, because quite often in terms of what I'm doing, I don't want it to do that. I want the focus to be on me or the person that I'm interviewing, rather than the person they've just looked at by mistake. So maybe a way of turning that off might be good. But I've seen tonight, one of my friends has told me that Focus Live, which is was the forerunner of it, has had an update and is allowing some editing. So I'm going to have a look at that in the next few days and see what's going on there, because I think that that's going to change as well. But I love it. I think it's great, and I think it's the biggest change and the biggest development in the cameras since the 6S. It really is, because it just does something new. It's great. Maybe the 10. The 10. I don't know.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Nick. I know your dinner is ready. So I don't want to hold you from that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. All right.
Really enjoyed it.
All right. And thank you to everybody out there. I think we're done.
Take care.
Bye-bye.